Good morning, everybody. We're going to give it a minute here while everyone filters into the webinar. So we're glad to have you here today. Just give it a minute or so. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off this morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Melissa Van Diepen. I'm the Chief Philanthropy Officer here at Stanislaus Community Foundation. And we are really grateful that you are giving up a little bit of time on this foggy Friday morning to be with us to hear about a little bit from Marian and from our board chair, Dave Olson. So just to let you know, as we are going through today's webinar, the chat is available. So if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. We should have some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar. And so once the webinar is complete, we will go ahead and either today or early next week, send out the recording to everyone along with the slide deck as well. And then we're also going to send a survey. So we always care about what your feedback is on any of the information we present to you guys. And so we will give you a survey to fill out. We promise it won't take you very long. And so with that, I would love to introduce the board chair for Stanislaus Community Foundation, Dave Olson.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our call this morning. My name is David Olson. I'm the board chair for the Community Foundation. I'm excited to be with you today as Marian Kaanon unveils Stanislaus Community Foundation's strategic framework for the next few years. I would be remiss, however, if I didn't acknowledge that none of our work, the foundation's work, would be possible without our continued partnership with our fundraisers, our nonprofits, and our community partners. I also want to thank my fellow board members, as you can see, a handsome group, who help lead Stanislaus Community Foundation and support our team day in and day out. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stanislaus County Community Foundation's president and CEO, Marian Kaanon. Marian?
Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate that introduction. Welcome, everyone. I just want to echo Dave's comments and Melissa's comments. Really appreciate your time this morning. We wanted to really be transparent and candid about our work for the next few years, our focus, and we always start our work with our vision and mission. So I want to start there this morning. You know, at the highest level, Stanislaus Community Foundation's vision, we believe that if we achieve our work and do it well, that our community becomes a community of choice where people choose to live, work, and thrive. And what we mean when we say that is that no one's here by default. No one's here because they got priced out of another housing market. No one's here because they were forced, to commute from another community. People are here because it is a community ultimately where they can raise their families, they can afford to live, they can have access to quality jobs and services and meaningful relationships and safe neighborhoods. We know we're not there yet. And in fact, you'll see in a moment that in some ways we may be slipping in achieving that vision, but it is still something that we want to strive forward and towards with many, many partners. And that brings us to our mission. We are an organization that doesn't believe that we can achieve this vision without doing it in partnership with others. And the way we specifically do it, not just through partnerships with our donors, our nonprofits, our public sector partners, our community members, we also, at the Stanislaus Community Foundation, our core mission is philanthropic investments in our community. And I know many of you know that, but that is really what we're here to do, is muster and gather charitable resources and then invest them back in the community. And then the words common good, this is something that I think sometimes feels a little cerebral for people or philosophic. What we mean by common good is the issues that impact all of us, that no one is responsible for, and yet we're all responsible for. Things like public safety and health and well-being. Things that, not one agency, entity, not one elected official or government administrator, not one school is responsible for. All of us play a hand in these quality of life issues. But we're here at the Community Foundation in a twofold mission to nurture partnerships and really invest philanthropic resources back into the community to really make this a community of choice. So I always want to start there to ground us in our work here at the Community Foundation. So moving forward, if you could move to the next slide, please. Here's how we do it. I mean, this is just a lot of numbers, but there's a transactional side, obviously, to what we do as a philanthropic, place-based foundation here in Stanislaus County. I don't know that many people know, because I think we're well known for a lot of our leadership work, but ultimately we are a funder that has multiple charitable funds. A lot of them, most of them, set up by donors, by philanthropically minded families and individuals. They come in the form of scholarship funds. A lot of families love to set up scholarship funds. We run a common application portal. It's actually open right now, so tell the students in your life about it. Last year, we awarded 165 students over $320,000 in scholarships, a lot of them multi-year and renewable. We're very proud of our scholarship program that's open to all Stanislaus County high school students that are college bound or current college students as well. But a lot of those funds that are under the auspices of the Community Foundation, we're not a single fund. We have multiple funds set up by corporations and families and individuals, all doing different things. One of those things is obviously all of the scholarship funds we provide. But we also gave out over $7 million this past year to local nonprofits and 801 grants. A lot of those, again, come from the charitable funds that families, individuals, and corporations have set up with us. There's about 196 of those funds. And right now within those funds, there's a little over 45 million in total assets. And we're very proud of the fact that we are deploying a lot of those assets back into the community year over year. So this is a good bird's eye view of what we've been up to transactionally in the last year. If we could move to the next slide, please. But there's many roles we play. Obviously, I just mentioned that we are a catalyzer of donor investments. We work with our donors, our families that invest their funds through us. So they're not giving to us. The best way to think of the Community Foundation is they're not giving to us, they're giving through us. And oftentimes they may seek guidance from us on where best to spend their dollars. A lot of times those families know exactly what they want to give to, and they're really using us just as a charitable vehicle to invest and grow their dollars. But we are first and foremost a catalyzer of donor investments. But over the last 10 years, we've also been an agile thought partner to our public systems. And what do I mean when I say that? And you'll hear more as the presentation continues, but we are a partner to our K-12 systems, our education systems, higher ed, to the county, to the cities, to the County Office of Education, where we work with them to move nimbly around the problems that really we face. A lot of times those public systems may not be able to respond as quickly or may not see some of the things we're seeing outside the system. And we have the ability to bring people together, which is that sort of intermediary between sectors and systems. We can move between different partners, between different systems, and hold people together. Over time, we've also been an engine for nonprofit organizations, and we certainly saw this during the pandemic. You know, we had donors like the Porges family and Dave Olson that you just heard from that created the RAD card program. They invested private philanthropic dollars in the gift card that then the Downtown Partnership took and expanded so that families could get a 2-for-1 dollar-to-dollar match to spend at downtown restaurants and retailers. So that was a little innovative prototype that we created that then the county scaled, which brings me to that idea of being an investor in little solutions that then government can take and scale. And I also like to think of ourselves as a vision keeper for the community. And you'll hear more about that as well. But we really are here, and every community foundation that serves their specific community across the country, because there's many community foundations, each of them place-based, just like Stanislaus Community Foundation. But we're here for the long term. We're here to help the community realize its highest potential. And so we do see ourselves very humbly as being part of that long-term vision for the community. Next slide, please. So how do we do some of this? I mean, who do we work with? And we created this just to show that there are many partners that we come alongside. This isn't something we do on our own. In fact, we are first and foremost a funder, but as I just showed you all those roles, but these are the folks that are often in the room or that we're inviting into the room or that we're going to meet with to really, again, talk about those issues that we all face, those larger issues. So these are many of the partners that we bring to the table or work across the table with. Next slide, please. So that brings us to today. I've been now at the Community Foundation for 11 years, and we have been operating for the last few years since the pandemic under sort of one-year business plans. But this past year really was a moment in time for the Community Foundation to begin to develop a new 3-year strategic framework, sort of a longer-term guiding vision. Some of the things that you're going to see haven't necessarily changed. Our core pillars haven't necessarily changed. The way we're going to go about how we do our work is changing, and that's what we wanted to share with you. But this past year was a moment for us to step back, coming out of the pandemic, now 3 years past the pandemic, coming out of Stanislaus 2030, which was a big signature initiative for us in 2021 and 2022. And as we look to the future, we actually held a series of listening sessions and work group sessions. They were called future sessions because we know we face very uncertain futures collectively as human beings. There's much that's changing. And we truly believe at the Community Foundation that it's a epochal shift that we are facing as a society. But we at the Community Foundation took this past 6 months to a year to really reflect on where we've been. We've been in the change business for over 10 years now, really driving initiatives and work forward. Next slide, please. Here's what we've, some of the things we've achieved in the past decade or tried to achieve. You know, obviously, when I talk about the transactional work we do, the philanthropic dollars we invest back in the community, we've quadrupled those assets. That 45 million you saw 10 years ago, we were at 12 million. The good news is we're keeping that money in the community. It's not evaporating out of the community. And with that, we've tripled our grant making and scholarship giving. You know, we were giving out $1 to $2 million a year. It's now over, as you saw, it's usually between 6 and 7 million a year that we're giving back into the community in the form of grants and scholarships. In the last decade, we've catalyzed 2 major sort of initiatives with multiple partners, the Cradle to Career Partnership that now is embedded at the County Office of Education. And we're now incubating Stanislaus 2030. But that was our moonshot coming out of the pandemic, where we began to understand that at the end of the day, the way to fight generational poverty and entrenched poverty is to really focus on higher wage jobs, access to those jobs, creating the industries that have those jobs, and then creating the educational pathways to get to those jobs. That was at the heart of Stanislaus 2030. It's still at the heart of Stanislaus 2030. I think it's some of the best work the Community Foundation has done. And we're now incubating Amanda Hughes and that team to continue that work forward. In the past decade, we've invested not just with our dollars, but really invested in local organizations and leaders through some signature programs with help from our donors. One of those was Profit with Purpose. It was funded and launched by the Porges family and the Porges Foundation in partnership with us. And that was a social enterprise accelerator. We took 11 nonprofits during the pandemic and we wrapped around them some rich training, business mentors, so that they could come up with business plans that could both support the clients they were serving, but also create new business revenue for those nonprofits. We launched Next Gen on Board with funding primarily from the Olson family, and that was to take emergent leaders, especially young leaders of color, Latino leaders, and place them on 2-year terms on nonprofit boards, and then also support them in a rich environment of training and collaboration. And we did that in partnership also with Youth Leadership Institute, an incredible statewide nonprofit. And so we've run 2 cohorts of Next Gen on Board. We also worked on the Irvine New Leadership Network in the around 2015 to 2018. That was again taking leaders that were emergent or emerging and really working with them on how to sort of deepen their leadership practice and their work in the community. In the last 10 years, we've also begun to understand that there's a migration of wealth that's happening in communities like Stanislaus. You know, a lot of higher net worth families in this community, their children, the next generation that they're going to pass their wealth to, may not live here. Those children may live elsewhere in California or elsewhere in the country. And so that wealth, as it's being rightfully transferred from one generation to the next, is evaporating from this community. So our transfer of wealth report quantified that there's going to be billions of dollars passed from one generation to the next, especially in Stanislaus County. And some of that wealth will evaporate if we're not careful to say, can you continue to invest in this community, in the nonprofits that are here, even as you transfer your wealth to your successor generation? So that was a report where we attempted to do that. In the last few years, we've published 2 different nonprofit sector reports, and we're actually working on a nonprofit survey that different organizations will see soon. We really wanted to assess the health of the nonprofit sector, especially during the pandemic. And that actual report then led to the county working with the Community Foundation to invest funding through CARES Act and ARPA to area nonprofits in the last 3 years. So we've really grown our grant making partnerships, not just with the donors, the families that invest through the Community Foundation, but with government systems and large corporations. Another body of work that we're very proud of in the last decade is we've invested in our local media infrastructure. Some of the journalism funding we've done has been some of the most impactful work we've done, because it's one thing to work on the issues. It's a whole nother thing to make sure those issues are amplified so that the community truly understands what's happening and truly understands what's at stake. Very proud of the funding we did with Report for America and the Modesto Bee that then led to reporters being hired that could report on children's issues, equity issues, education, economic mobility. And so some of the news stories you may have seen in the last few years have been a result of the work of those reporters that we have funded with philanthropic dollars. A lot of the work in the last few years also has been to support new nonprofits coming into the community. We love all of our nonprofits. They all do incredible work. But one of the things we've realized, especially through the nonprofit sector report and in our own work with the Cradle to Career Partnership in Stanislaus 2030, is we're missing some nonprofits that are working on root causes like workforce training, job skills training, systems development. So some of the organizations we list here, Downtown Streets Team, Able Works, Improve Your Tomorrow, Digital Nest, Health Force Partners, and now Go Public Schools. All of those are nonprofits from elsewhere in the state that do incredible work. And we're looking at coming into the Central Valley, and we partnered with a lot of these nonprofits to support them as they entered the market and funded them to do so. So very proud of these nonprofits, along with many, many local organizations that we continue to work with. So I would say this is a lot. This is some of the highlights of the last year. And I'm proud to say, and I say this very humbly, I think in doing some of this work, one of the byproducts, one of the organic sort of byproducts is people have shifted their consciousness about what's possible. People have begun to work together in new ways. We're not taking sole responsibility for that, the Community Foundation. That's just an observation we've made and supported through some of this work, is by working around all of these things, we've begun to see that people are working together in new ways. And yet, next slide, please. Nothing's changing. Some things are changing. And yet we are still facing incredible, incredible challenges. And I say that not to upset anyone or to throw people under the bus or to put anyone down or to say someone did something wrong or people are failing their basic duties. But I think we have to be sober and clear about the challenges we face. And so even as I mentioned all of the good work the Community Foundation has attempted to accomplish in the last decade, I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that we still face entrenched poverty, that more than ever before, our community is not an affordable place to live. And by the way, it's not just our community, it's communities across the country. So we have to acknowledge there's larger societal, as I mentioned, epochal things that are happening. But we have to be aware of that. We have to be aware of the context we're in. And so it's one thing to sort of celebrate the good, and we have to also acknowledge that there's so much more work to be done. And so the reflection we've done in the last year is to really understand, why are there still so many barriers to changing these issues? Entrenched poverty, decreasing affordability, coming out of the pandemic, civic identity is frayed. You certainly see that at the national level, the cynicism, the political polarization, it is also alive and well in this community. Some of that is due to a lack of local news. You know, as much as our local news outlets try, they're not where they used to be. Most of us are relying on our social media feeds to understand what's happening. So I think it's really a lot of different things are causing this cynicism, this despair, this lack of connectivity, this social fabric to be fraying. But I think we have to acknowledge it if we're going to get through it. At the system level, what we're seeing is public agencies are well-meaning. And there's a great article. I'm going to ask Sam to drop it in the chat. And I'd love for all of you to walk away from today's webinar and read it. It's by David Brooks, and it appeared in yesterday's New York Times, and it's called Death by 1,000 Paper Cuts. And what it really speaks to is what I've been trying to articulate is we have worked with our systems, and I mentioned some of the work we've attempted to do, and yet our systems still struggle to make meaningful change, not because anyone's doing anything wrong, but because the bureaucracies have gotten so cumbersome that they can't actually move quickly and with any urgency. We saw, though, during the pandemic that is possible, that you can move with urgency. We saw our school systems move to technology rapidly. We saw public meetings, become available via Zoom. And yet we also know that was a window of time, and now we're slipping back. And so I think crisis always causes great innovation, but you can't stay in crisis forever, but you need that innovation. So we've seen in our systems, they're measuring for compliance a lot of times, but their data may not always be used to then make meaningful change and truly serve those that need to be served. I will also point out, and this is just based on our personal experience in working with big public systems, that turnover is real among system leaders and system managers, and those are highly disruptive to any large-scale change effort. So I want to call that out because it's something that really we may not realize is causing us to stay stagnant, but it is very disruptive to meaningful change, is the turnover that happens in systems. At the organization level, we see that nonprofits did some incredible work during the pandemic, but they're not well resourced. Donors are fatigued. They are facing staffing challenges to both recruit and retain quality staff. A lot of our nonprofit leaders, quite frankly, based on my conversations with them, are exhausted. And their service model is often focused on some downstream services, but may not always be addressing the root cause. And again, no one's doing anything wrong. We're just being as honest as we can with each other. At the individual level, we see that our business leaders can be incredibly thoughtful, especially locally, and supportive, and yet largely they are frustrated with state politics. They're highly cynical of government, and sometimes that cynicism bleeds over into some of the work that nonprofits might be trying to do. We also see a lack of succession planning for nonprofit leaders. And we see elected officials facing an increasingly polarized community with competing interests, and that tends to freeze a lot of elected officials in either fight or flight or freeze mode. But that also becomes a barrier to meaningful change. So I say all of this not to depress you. I say all of this, and this is the common theme you're going to hear me say, so that we could be as clear-sighted and sober about the challenges we face, and then begin to pivot to meaningful action. And that's the whole pivot you're going to see from the Community Foundation the years to come, is we are going to get granular and surgical with our work. We're going to get very just focused on what needs to happen. And you're going to see us do 1,000 different things versus 2 big things. And so that's what I'm going to share with you in a little bit. Next slide, please. Here's some of the data, and I point this out. There's so much rich data out there. We've listed some of the data sources at the bottom of the slide. Highly encourage you to look at all of these data sources, because this is just, we're just picked a few very key pieces. We could literally spend an entire 5 webinars on some of the data related to this community. But 53% of Stanislaus families still struggle to make ends meet and rely on some form of public services to do so. Only 18% of our adults have a bachelor's degree over age 25. Roughly a quarter of K-12 students are English language learners. And I'm an English language learner. I didn't speak English until age 7. I don't say this data as a negative, but again, it's something that we have to be aware of. And how are we teaching and what are we teaching? But these are English language learners. You know, this slide around the data around almost 50% of our community is Latinx. And yet we do not see a representation in the Latino community among elected officials, managers, nonprofit leaders, and teachers. That needs to change. This is a community that is vibrant and alive and just incredibly rich with resource and wisdom and knowledge. And they are the future of our community. And how do we work to support that community to begin to transition into power? That's something we think a lot about. You're going to see some slides related to that in a moment. And then 77%, this is an alarming statistic, 77% of our community's low-income households spend 50% of their income on housing. Half of their income on housing, 2/3 of our low-income neighbors, compared to 1% of moderate income households. So another sort of data point just to illuminate some of the challenges we face. Next slide, please. So I wanted to kind of go from celebrating some of the work we've done and some of the things we've accomplished in partnership with others, and then talk about the lessons we're learning along the way that may be barriers. And then you saw some data related to pointing out, you know, where this community may be. And these are larger headwinds. These are sort of those epochal shifts that I mentioned. Climate change, it's real. And I'm not going to, you know, argue the point of whether it's real or not. It is. And the impact of all of these things on our local community is what the Community Foundation is thinking about. And with climate change, it's the impact on our water supply and the meaning of that for agriculture, which is a big economic driver. We're thinking about education and workforce development and how quickly things are shifting, the future of jobs due to changing technology and AI and automation, and what that means for our lower skilled workers especially. We're thinking about significant political polarization, as I mentioned. We're in election year. We know in the coming 12 months, this community and this country may be torn apart by the political polarization and the mis and disinformation that may be happening. How do we begin to address that? We're looking at the migration of wealth. There's a lot of, in the last few years, sales of locally owned corporations and donors, again, beginning to transfer their wealth to their successor generations who may or may not live here. What is the impact of that for our nonprofits and for this community? Shifting demographics. These are the epochal shifts I mentioned, by race, by age, by gender. Almost 70% of Stan State's freshman class is female. What is happening to our males? We ask that question. We are almost a 50% Latino community. How do we begin to support that community to come into power? Donor fatigue. That is real, and we get it. Potential state and local funding shifts, the state budget right now, and the questions around whether it's, you know, what programs it may need to cut, what shifts may need to be made at the state and federal level. So all of these things are also headwinds that we face, not just in this community, but across this country. And again, rooting ourselves in the context of this is not because we want to sort of alarm anybody. Again, it's about getting really sober and clear so that we can begin to act accordingly. So I want to now shift into exactly that. So what does this all mean, and what does it mean for us moving forward? Next slide, please. So, you know, I mentioned this, quite frankly, we're shifting our strategies and funds. We're evolving them here at the Community Foundation, partly because innovation cannot just come from one or two places. Innovation needs to be rooted throughout this community, but especially from people in closest proximity to the problems. And when I mentioned that we're getting more surgical and granular, we're really beginning to understand that this community is like a rainforest. And I've been saying this more and more. You know, if you've ever had the honor to walk through a rainforest, it's a verdant, alive, vibrant place, and yet it's the root system of the rainforest that brings life to it. It's largely invisible. You can't see the root system, but it's interconnected. And so we're beginning to see that there's an investment the Community Foundation is going to make in the root system of this community so that it grows and prospers in many, many different ways. And we're wanting to do that with people in closest proximity to the issues, with public agencies and nonprofits scaling solutions that work. Listen, we're never going to have all the money at the community. We're actually a very small player when it comes to actual dollars. But what we can do with those small dollars is test things and innovate things that our public systems are hard pressed to do because of their bureaucracies and their unwieldy systems, and test small solutions and then scale them. And that's what we're prepared to do. Ultimately, what we want to do at the end of the day, our vision, and I mentioned it at the beginning, but I'm actually want to put a finer point on it. If we do our work well here at the Community Foundation, behind the scenes and with our partners, ultimately we want to see greater self-sufficiency and upward mobility for more people in this community. And that's not something that can be achieved in a year or two. This is generational work, but we absolutely believe it's possible. Next slide, please. And we think that this change is possible working at multiple levels of change. So you saw me earlier talk about some of the barriers that we face at the sort of individual, community, organizational system level. At the same time, we want to work across all of those levels and levers of change. It's not going to be just one sort of place. It's really multiple things. It's still systems change work with some of these systems you see listed here. It's still investing in the nonprofits and resourcing them so that they are being able to advance their services and even innovate their services and serve more people. And it's investing in that root system of the people that make all of this work. At the end of the day, all of this is run by human beings like me and you. And how do we empower and equip them and celebrate them and invest in them to make the change that needs to happen at the organizational system level? These are multiple levels of change, and we're very prepared to sort of invest at all of these levels. Next slide, please. So here's the future we're working toward. This is what, if we are successful over time, I think we're always working towards these futures. But we want to experience systems that are responsive to the communities they serve. They're agile, they're thoughtful, they're accountable, they're responsible, they're well run and well managed, but more importantly, they truly are serving the needs of local residents. We want to see a new vision and new leadership. We want to see that leadership be more representative of this community in the years to come. We want to see leaders that make hard decisions, that have honest conversations, that are humble and curious. We want to see innovative and thriving nonprofits. They are truly the lifeblood of this community. We saw that during the pandemic, and we see that now. How do we invest in them so they're not exhausted? They're not coming from a place of scarcity, and I understand why sometimes they do, but that they are well-resourced and able to serve the needs of this community in the same way that our public systems are, albeit at a different level. We want to see more empowered, engaged residents. We want to see more folks running for public office and volunteering in this community. And we really believe that a gateway to that is in investing in our nonprofits. And we want to see our business leaders and donors energized and excited about the possibilities ahead of us. So this is the future we're working towards. And again, we don't do anything without doing it in tandem with others. We feel that this is a shared future, obviously. Again, a recurrent theme is that there's not going to be just one entity, one person, one agency working towards this future. This is not something to be achieved by a small group of people. This is something that requires all of us to have our hand on the prow of the ship. Next slide, please. So here is our larger sort of strategic framework, and we reserve the right to evolve this over time. This is very much a living body of work, and it always has been. But we want to create a community that works for more people. And we plan to do that. And a lot of these pillars haven't changed, as I mentioned. You know, we've always wanted to ensure that economic mobility is happening in this community. That was the whole point of Stanislaus 2030. But we now also want to invest in housing. We have some interesting things we're cooking up that we feel will be directly beneficial to residents. And again, they'll be not at scale because we don't have, you know, government dollars, but there'll be prototypes, things like potentially a shared appreciation fund where we are investing in homeowners and getting them into their first homes, but then taking that and trying to scale it with government partners. We also have created a leadership in education and ag fund. We want the ag community to really see themselves being of this community. And how do we begin to support local ag leaders to invest back into the community? We also have invested in North San Joaquin Valley Health Force Partners to really bolster health careers in this community and build out that sector and the supports for that sector. So all of that falls under our economic opportunity work. And these are just some of the highlights. There's much more. We just couldn't put it on one slide. We've always worked in educational attainment with the Cradle to Career Partnership, and we will continue to support that partnership to make meaningful systems change. But we also are opening up an education solutions fund, and this is going to be really working on, again, sort of piloting interesting things that can then be scaled by school systems. And so you're going to be hearing more. We've bolded all of the grant-making funds that we are doing. So the things you see in bold are things that are actually going to be supporting the community in different ways, but primarily through grants. I mentioned Go Public Schools as a new nonprofit, and we're very excited about their entry into our community. They are really here to support parents to become empowered and equipped to really hold our school systems accountable for the education of their children. The Health Careers Fund is a longtime fund we've had here, and we're going to continue to grant money out of that fund to bolster health careers. And then our scholarship program that I've mentioned that we're very proud of, and we want to grow that. That is primarily for first-gen college-going students, which is the majority of high school students in Stanislaus County. Another body of work for us is really strengthening our civic identity and infrastructure for all the reasons you've heard me just mention. We are opening 2 resident-led grant funds. One is going to be Latino residents who are going to be supported to make grants back into their community, to celebrate their community, to feel a sense of pride in their incredible community. And so we have a donor that stepped up and created a fund, and these Latino residents, not Latino leaders, but residents, the teachers, the average everyday folks in all of these communities, giving them the funds to reinvest back into their community. And we feel like we're going to learn a lot from that particular fund. And then the sister fund to that fund that our donor also created is for our local Black community. And that will be also local residents of that community reinvesting and bolstering their community. And we're going to really amplify both of those funds to understand how did we reinvest back into those communities. So we're really looking forward to those 2 funds. We are going to invest in community journalism. We're going to continue to do that work. It's incredibly vital work. There are potentially new digital media platforms, bolstering existing media platforms, strengthening through the Civic Solutions Fund, which is also a new fund, rebuilding the civic leadership in our community. What does it mean to be a member of civil society? What does it mean to participate in our democracy? So we're very excited about the potential for the Civic Solutions Fund and our work around community journalism. We are launching a Latino Leadership Fund. Again, that's going to be run by Latino business leaders and reinvesting in Latino leadership. And then we have a Central Valley Legislative Roundtable where we have linked arms with community foundations up and down the Central Valley that serve the other parts of the Central Valley from Stockton down to Bakersfield to really bring our electeds together across the region and specifically their district staff to learn together to advocate for a larger political agenda for the Central Valley up in Sacramento. And then the 4th body of work, we have always invested in nonprofit innovation. I mentioned Profit with Purpose, Next Gen on Board. What we're really excited about is a entirely new body of work that the Porges Foundation and the Porges family, which quite frankly is one of the most forward-thinking families in our community and the most generous, most likely. They have pulled together with the Community Foundation a new Porges Nonprofit Excellence Initiative. And we're actually gonna have a separate webinar to talk about multiple pieces of the initiative, because there's multiple programs for nonprofits, including a sabbatical fund, investing in mid-level managers, and a succession planning program, among other offerings. So that is incredibly exciting work for us. We're putting the details around all of that together now. And those of you that are nonprofits that are on this call, we would love to have you join us later in the month, and we'll give you those dates so that you can hear more about that. We also have Friends of the Foundation. It's a membership group of local donors that have agreed to go on this journey with us to understand all these forces at play, but to also come together and support our mission and the vital work of the Community Foundation. And we've had more than 40 families sign up to be Friends of the Foundation. And then obviously our ongoing grant making is also part of this. So, continuing to reinvest back into the community. So that's the work here. This is sort of our larger body of work. And I'll get to the questions. I'm seeing them pop up, and please put your questions in the chat. I would like to, next slide, please. None of this would be possible, as Dave mentioned, without the leadership of our board and the work of this incredible team. So I just want to thank this team day in, day out. They are putting all of this work in motion that I've been talking. I'm the talking head, but they are the arms, the legs, the body, the brains of all of this work. So we just have a really talented team and a forward-thinking board. And I just would be remiss if I didn't thank the actual people that make all of this move. Next slide, please. How can you get involved? Well, there's many ways. And we'd love for you, those of you that have the means, there's many ways that you can work with us by opening funds and giving through us, through scholarship funds, donor advised funds. Those are growing and reinvesting back into the community, using the Community Foundation as a charitable vehicle. You can join the Friends of the Foundation. That's very easy to do. And you would learn more about this community through that membership group. You can contribute to some of the leadership funds I just mentioned, the Civic Solutions Fund, the Housing Solutions Fund, the Education Solutions Fund. Those are all funds that will grow over time and again be reinvested back into the community, albeit with a very strong point of view. We have an open house coming up on Thursday, February 15th here at our offices. We'd love to see your faces in real time, IRL, as they say. We'd love for you to join us just to mingle and say hello. We are virtually launching the Porges Nonprofit Excellence Initiative on Thursday, February 29th. So that will be a webinar. We'd love to dig more into the details of that initiative. That is specifically for our nonprofit organizations. You'll hear directly from Evan Porges, and he'll talk about sort of the why behind all of this work. We also, at that webinar, will be launching the Stanislaus Story Project, which I didn't mention, but that is a grant writing toolkit we've developed that's incredibly comprehensive, and it was developed with an advisory committee of local nonprofits and co-written by Karen Service, who's sort of the grant writing guru in this community. So we're going to debut that resource for nonprofits and also go into greater detail on the Porges Nonprofit Excellence Initiative. And then, of course, you're always welcome to stay connected to us through our newsletters, social platforms, our events. Those are throughout the year. So I would love to see your questions now, and absolutely you're welcome. Please read that article. It's a good one. I see here, what sorts of goals does the sabbatical program look to achieve? Quite frankly, the first goal is rest. We do not prioritize rest and reflection in this country. And in this community. I mentioned our nonprofit leaders are exhausted. I think all of us are exhausted. But I think doing something as unorthodox as saying, instead of being hyper productive, maybe you just need a month or two to recenter yourself and then come back re-energized and able to serve this community. And so I think there's something very powerful in letting our nonprofit leaders rest. We ask a lot of them. And so that's the goal. And yes, here. I second that motion as well. So would love if there's any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We can see them and respond to them. Let's see here. Is there anything else? Happy to, yeah. So this is sort of, I'm not seeing any questions, but you're always welcome to send them to us. Can you talk a little more about succession planning? Yes. So again, you'll hear more about this at the webinar at the end of February, but we are working with a consultant who really works with nonprofit boards on succession planning. But basically, this is an opportunity for nonprofits to work with the program we're developing so that their board and their executive are really thinking through what's the long-term succession planning, not just for the executive director, but the mid-level managers that may be ready to step into greater positions of leadership over time. I think there's a transition that's happening, not just in our public systems, but in all of our organizations. And so how do we begin to support those transitions so that they're very intentional and so that there's a high caliber and quality of leadership that's prepared for all these challenges that we face? So you're seeing us kind of take a step back and not just, sort of support systems change work, but really understand at the end of the day that we won't have capacity to make meaningful change across the board anywhere really if our people, if the human beings are not invested in, if they don't have the bandwidth, if they are exhausted, if they don't have the resources, if they're running ragged. And we saw that coming out of the pandemic. We saw that at the end of Stanislaus 2030, where there were a lot of folks that weren't ready to pick up that incredible work and take it forward. And we paid attention to that. That was a data point for us that, gosh, we've got to take a step back and actually invest in the capacity and the bandwidth of the people that are moving these things forward so they can be moved forward and done so well. And so that's some of what I'm talking about when we talk about sabbaticals and succession planning. We think it leads to systems change too. Oh, thank you. There's a comment here. Thank you for sharing all of this. I'm not depressed. This is Dina. I hope you don't mind me saying this is you, Dina Elliott. We've needed so many of these things for so many years. Thank you for saying that. I think, at the end of the day, and I've said this to a lot of you, there's no one coming to save us. We're here to save ourselves, and we are our own heroes. We're the heroes in our own stories. We think this community, while it faces many challenges, those challenges aren't specific to just this community. So let's not, get too sad about that. Let's not stay in a low place. We absolutely have what it takes to move this community forward. And in fact, I think to buck the trend of cynicism and despair. But it is going to take, it's going to take a lot of us to dig deep and see new leadership in this community that supports all of that. I'm seeing a question here. Outside of financial support, is there any support you need as a foundation to help you move this work forward? Thank you for that question. That's great. You're going to see some of that. We'd love for people to help promote the 2 resident-led funds so we can get we don't have that reach oftentimes into the community. So we're going to work with nonprofit partners to hopefully really get us some residents that can reinvest the grants back into the community. Yeah, and there's this slide about how you can get involved. There's all sorts of ways to get involved. We're not a big volunteer. We're a small, tiny little organization. So there's not a lot of volunteer opportunities at the Community Foundation, but you could be a scholarship reader. So there's different ways. So shoot us an email for those of you. There's a survey link that you're going to see in a minute. You're welcome to put your information in there and we can certainly have a deeper conversation. Yeah, I hear you're intentional about creating opportunities for Black and Latinx communities. How are we being more inclusive for those that are far worse than Black and Latinx communities like Indigenous, SEA, Southeast Asian communities invisible? That's a wonderful comment. I think it's really beginning to understand the needs of those communities. I don't think we have a grasp fully, and I'm not making an excuse here on the needs. And we don't presume to say that the needs are exactly alike from each community to the next. So I think first understanding and listening very humbly. I will tell you some of the work around media that we want to invest in is to bring more voices in the room. And how do we highlight the stories of communities that aren't often represented in local media across the country and in our communities? And I think it begins there, to begin to highlight those communities that, to your point, I think you used the word invisible. How do we How do we make them visible? How do we support them in their visibility? What are their needs? And then how do we respond? So I don't want to say I have answers. I think I have questions, and that's where we're beginning. Thank you for all these. I love these comments. Thank you. This is very, I don't know if all of you can see this, because I think this is just for the whole, but there's, this is a breath of fresh air, the type of breath that is deep, long, grounding, and fulfilling for our individual and collective lungs. Thank you, Tony, Jordan. That was beautiful, beautifully said. Is there a place for special district organizations, schools, fires, conservation in the nonprofit outreach programs? Absolutely. If you see yourself in this work, let us know. We'd love to have conversations with you. We're always open. Again, we do everything in partnership with others, so we cannot do this work alone. So if any of this work resonates with you, please do let us know. And we're happy to have those conversations and figure ways we might partner together. Thank you for all these lovely comments. I think I've answered the questions. And if there are, I'll just leave it open for another minute and see if there's more questions. I appreciate all of you so much. I will tell you, as we begin the new year, I'm excited. I'm excited about the work ahead, even as we know that we face tremendous challenges. And I think that's what I want to leave you with, is the promise of possibility. It's still alive and well, and we have to believe in it. There's a survey link here for you. Feel free to cut and paste that if you can, or quickly write it down. You will get an email, I believe, after this webinar, and Samantha's putting 2 thumbs up in the air, I can see from my office. So you're going to get an email with a recording. Feel free to share that widely if you'd like with your friends and colleagues and others. You will get a recording, and there will be this survey link there. We'd love your feedback. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Tell us what you have questions on. Know that this work is evolving. It's alive. It's going to shift over time, and that we truly cannot do it without you. And there's the survey link there too. I just want to leave you with that sort of. I recently spoke to a Rotary Club and left them with a benediction. I'm not going to offer up a whole benediction for all of you, but just know that this community is at a profound, pivotal moment, and we have all the tools and resources we need to get through it and build something much better. And I'm excited to be just one small part of that here at the Community Foundation. And so thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for all the great comments. Really excited that this resonated with you. And just make sure I answered everything. So we will do all of that. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend. Thank you for joining us.